Making DC films seems to be some serious hard work, because even with all of these perfectly functional modern tropes, when slapped onto a DC film, somehow it still leaves something to be desired. The Harley Quinn movie, or as it's officially known, Birds of Prey and the Fabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, is the latest in DC's attempt to hit cinematic gold, and is somewhat a switch up to the formula of its past. Though maybe it's more accurate to say that they're just running with a different rusty formula that also doesn't quite make amazing films. I'm not a DC hater, and I didn't come into this film expecting to hate it. In fact, I don't hate it. It's a fun and colourful film full of frantic kinetic energy, and if it popped up on cable TV, I'd probably rewatch it. If I ever get cable TV. But this movie was clearly trying some new things, and I feel it made some good steps in the right direction, but at the same time, it's got a long way to go before it's anything truly notable. It's not bad, but it's still pretty flawed. So Birds of Prey and the Fabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn is all about the immediate aftereffects of our Harley Quinn coming to terms with Jared Leto's incineration and their relationship coming to an end. Literally clearing herself of her past, emancipation. I totally didn't know that definition solely from Portal and the Emancipation Grills. And that on its own is actually a great foundation for a premise of a film. A psychologically unhinged yet crazy fun character in a moment of despair through heartbreak and isolation? Sounds like a great, fun, messy time. And it is. But this premise was taken in a few strange directions. For a start, it was marketed as a Birds of Prey movie. You know, the whole girl gang group. But this film doesn't really do them justice. This is a Harley Quinn film through and through. She's the most popular character, so it makes sense, but even still, everyone else is kind of shafted to the side as much as morally possible for Harley to take the center stage. It's not that bad, since many characters do kind of get their moment, but there was still something to be desired for their character developments. At first, I figured this was kind of a good thing, since it had an awfully slow build-up to their actual collaboration. It was no Justice League or Suicide Squad with team building. It decided to wait until like the last, 10 minutes of the 109-minute runtime, but then it just kind of ended. The pacing on that was good enough in that I knew the characters by the end, but I didn't really get to know them too well. And with characters like Huntress, who basically plays out like an evolved form of Ramona Flowers, I'd love to see her more, since she kinda stole most of her scenes, but she was relegated to a later appearance and mere flashbacks on her awesome backstory. But back to Harley Quinn, her presentation with this breakup premise continues to go in weird directions. It's clear that DC looks around nervously to see what's successful and tries to take elements that it can. One such example is the clear correlation to the successes of Deadpool. You know how we love how that character is all about dialogue and breaking the fourth wall? Yeah, well apparently Harley Quinn got the memo about her movie reality too, somehow. And it doesn't really work nearly as well, for a handful of reasons. For a start, why is she doing this? It's a new thing as far as I can tell, and it's awfully jarring. Like, I get it to a degree, she's unhinged and we're meant to be in her head. She's telling the story because she didn't realize that it wasn't officially just her story. And maybe she's so psychotic that she knows about us, or she just talks to herself and poses anyway, and the camera just happens to catch her eye contact. You know what, maybe that'll be my headcanon for this film. She's just unhinged to the point that she's talking to herself. We'll do it from time to time. Harley Quinn, though, is just a little bit excessive for 100 minutes. But still, this Deadpool effect doesn't really work for her because she's also not nearly as fun as Deadpool. Sure, she's great to look at when she's fighting or how she interacts in her own deranged way, but just chatting, she's just okay. She's not full to the brim with wit and comedic timing, she's just chatty, and it's all a little bit forced. I had high hopes for the start of this film's comedic beats with her whole sequence over her breakfast sandwich, and how when everything was crashing towards her, she was most devastated over her sandwich scattering onto the road, but that level of humor never really returned. Was this film even trying to be funny? It's fun, but doesn't really try to push any good boundaries there, you know? And a lot of jokes fell flat. I don't know, they were just too formulaic. Hey, you know that trope we like of witty pop culture references like Squidward in Infinity War? Hey, what if we called Huntress Robin Hood in passing? That'd be a great joke that, you know, we're totally not kinda needing any jokes. Or there's those other jokes that aren't really even, like, nose puff worthy. They're more like trailer bait, like that hyena Bruce one. What was that about? That's not even, like, no. But while DC was still trying some new things in less powerful ways, there were some classic old traits that continue to hammer the film down a tad. And one of the obvious ones is its structure. I don't know what it is about bad DC films, but why can't we watch something in somewhat chronological order anymore? Why do we have to keep hibbity-hopping around the story so much? Is it a Deadpool thing? I can understand that it's part of the unhinged theme of the film, but terrible filmmaking is still terrible. I don't like being told I have to go back and watch 20 minutes of scene building to reconnect to the end of another scene. I watched this film a second time just to see if I could piece it together more smoothly, and it kinda helped. I realized that each back jump was introducing a new character entirely, until it started doing it anyway without that prompt, so... But speaking of theming, there was something quite prevalent that made good sense in a lot of ways, though its execution was still kinda waning it down. It's the big ol' female empowerment. And contextually looking at this film, it should work fantastically in a lot of ways. DC has snuck in a 1-2 punch of female frontrunners before Marvel's crawl of a Black Widow film, and Harley Quinn, though maybe not a great role model, is a great female character that people can look up to and can clearly hold their own, physically at least, maybe not emotionally or mentally. She's evil, sure, but she's popular, and boosting her story off of not leaning on a boy sends a great message. Combining her with the Birds of Prey plot to give us a girl power team also makes a lot of sense. It's not some hashed moment to rip you out of the story, it works perfectly in the world of this film's setting, and is a great theme to continue running with. Where it falls flat is the over-exaggeration of many of these characters in the first place. Girl power moments happen every single day in real life, and they don't always involve some evil man overlord and his thug collection of other men. So why do these films feel the need to look down on its audience and dumb down the playing field to showcase their positive message? To me, it just comes off as condescending to anyone watching. As if girl power is specifically a men-hating rhetoric because they must all be evil, which isn't reality. Why do these men have to be cartoons beyond their normal boundaries? Can't you tell the message more naturally and maturely? I actually had a whole argument about how every single guy in this film is a baddie, but actually there's a couple outliers. The truck guy at the start is just peeing, and there is one girl mercenary driving behind them who gets blown up by some dynamite. And hey, with Dazz being such a lady killer, maybe he just killed any of the girl thugs, or Black Mask didn't want to protect them because he's a misogynist too. Still, your message kind of gets muddled when it's so over the top to reality, you know? It's like you're baby talking the message. Still, I've been awfully negative up to this point, and it is a little unrepresentative. This movie is not the new hot trash. In a sense, it's pretty good. But that's all I'd say. Pretty good. It's not great or wonderful, and it's certainly not perfect, but it stands alright on its own 2 feet. It somehow does feel awfully punk rock, and there are many fantastic elements. The cinematography and the color palette are especially nice on the eyes, and works great as it highlights Harley's chaotic personality. There's that one Chicago moment with diamonds are a girl's best friend, which is perfectly on theme for Harley and the film, and then there's the fight scenes. I'm not much of a choreography guy, my girlfriend's the choreographer, but I couldn't not notice how many of these action scenes played out. Beyond the actual hand-to-hand combat, which was fun and kinda eye-rolling material because of course the cage doors unlock 30 seconds later, and of course the beard guy waits for the lighter to be flicked on first, but the part that really stood out to me was the settings for each scene. Obviously, a plain white box is like the worst case scenario for a location, but the environmental factors that went into each scene were fantastic. Even when it was all pretty flat and metallic, we'd have sprinklers showering the entire scene to sweep up water from every movement. And the final act's display within an abandoned circus funhouse allowed for some nice reactionary moments. I've never thought of fighting down a winding slide, but there it is. Incredibly fun and definitely deserving of a lot of praise. Though, why are the lights on? It's abandoned, isn't it? They totally could have played with the lighting more. Still, it's great. But even there, I do have a caveat to those positive points. And that is because there's another pickpocketed portion of other successful films that, to me, don't really click as well with Birds of Prey. Deadpool did it first, then Logan followed up, and sure, Joker did a good job with it too, but the R-rated content, I don't really think it blended all too well for this film. It's the new high that higher-ups want all films to jump onto, right? I get it, but from what we've seen so far with how it's been used, it's been great. But here, it just feels unneeded. It's a pointless, edgy addition, I feel. In a film that boasts its light-hearted, chaotic, cartoony plotline, why does the violence have to push that next extra boundary? For Deadpool, it works for his detachable body parts. For Joker and Logan, it's the intense seriousness of how events are played out. For Harley Quinn, sure, she is dangerous, so probably would break legs and all that, but I don't really feel it adds anything to the story as a whole, and just feels like a new trope to be abused where it's not needed. Or maybe that's just because I'm squeamish on these R-rated fight scenes. Am I seriously the only one that doesn't like the idea of seeing bodies bent the wrong way? Even if you could say it works with building up the villain since he's a fan of literal face masks, that'd be fine if he wasn't just an easy cartoon for the rest of the film. If he was a serious threat with horrifying morals, maybe I could line up with it more, but here it's just another wasted trope that doesn't really belong in a Harley Quinn film, or at least not the one that this film sets out to be. Speaking of our villain, let's briefly touch on our characters, the ones that are noteworthy anyway. I enjoyed Black Mask at first. In this film, he's transformed into a cliche business boss type, and he does some bad things. But what was fun was his goofy presentation in his separate scenes. It seemed like they were going for the funny-to-watch villain trope, but then it all just kinda falls off from there. As a jokester, he becomes less funny, and as a character, he just becomes less and less interesting. They make a point in a text piece that he partially hates Harley for being a girl, which I kinda read as more of a tongue-in-cheek dig at him. But then, no, he's just a straight-up misogynist, because evil, right? His motives seem flat, and his characterizations boiled more and more into generic baddie the more it progressed. The best villains are either fun to watch cartoony, or morally ambiguous to the point that it makes you question your own moral spectrum against theirs. This guy is just generic fodder, like a clownier version of the Joker. Also, Dazz comes off as far more dislikable, enabling all of Black Mask's misogynistic moments and shooting down our characters much more rigorously. And genericism, if that's a word, plagues a lot of this film. Originality is severely lost on this production, which is a shame since when DC tries it, they strike gold. Our other characters are more cliches we've seen 100 times before. We've got our buddy cop, an underdog of the police force and doing her own detective work. They even point out the cliche of being left off makes her a stronger character, and then just continue with it anyway. Spice it up with the man being the villain who steals the credit and you've got a social justice award, right film? Who needs compelling storytelling? Your other character is a pickpocket who picks the wrong pocket and sparks the entire plot of chasing after the pickpocketed piece, which isn't that just exciting and not the most unoriginal crime plot you can imagine. Like, I don't get it. Why do these kind of films always want the pickpocket taken alive anyway? It's not really needed other than for plot armor. Same as hiring Harley to collect her. It's just dumb fun for the villain and us. How does everyone know the kid is in the police office at first? And what's especially dire is that this film is so heavily focused on the plot as being the sole driver of progression, and yet it's the most bland foundation they could have possibly run with. It's a total waste of time for these characters who maybe could have made some interesting pathways of their own with just a little bit of character development and character-driven premises. And it's strange, because the marketing was entirely different to the actual end result of the film. The trailer uses a good chunk of footage from the final 15 minutes, basically because the gang doesn't even combine until right at the very end, and the things that did stay in the trailer edit don't really represent the film well at all. It's weird and an awful bit misleading for what people may have come into the cinemas for. We're shown the third act in the trailers, but we have an awful lot of waiting to get to that point. This film, I imagine, is great if you're not fully paying attention to it. You know, it's kind of good as a party film. Don't think about it too much, right? That sequence is fun and all, right? But That's all it is. It shouldn't have any consequences of the come down immediately afterwards. That just wouldn't make a fun film or highlight any of Harley Quinn's destructive personality, now would it? Nah, it is just a damage booster for fight scenes, right? Yeah, it's perfectly fine to go driving immediately afterwards, which is what they actually do in the film. Like, where's that whole aspect of life? But you know, there were still a couple of good moments bubbling around in that time span. Only moments, sure, but still, I enjoyed the animated opening explaining all of Harley Quinn's backstory in a succinct way to catch up all fans onto the same page. That was great. And the confetti gunfight across the police offices was great fun and perfectly Harley Quinn. The cinematography of seeing how the crossbow killer killed those 4 guys at the start was really cool to see. And you know what? I may have ragged on a lot of these characters, but this film gives us a goodish amount of screen time for each of them, to the point where I feel it's a good enough stepping stone into future appearances. I know somewhat who these characters are, and it isn't nearly as rushed as other DC productions. And I'll admit, I wouldn't hate seeing them again, especially Huntress. She could just have a whole film if she wants, perfectly awkward and badass at the same time. And I loved how you could see she was stalking Dazz throughout the entire film. Bit more noticeable the second time round, but I love it. The only other thing I have to say is about the ending. Both the third act and the final climax and the post-credits scene. So if you don't want to know, this is your time to jump ship. I'll keep this ending text up if you want to skip forwards. So, that ending, huh? It was I like the bigger fight with all the girls and the gang army, but just Black Mask exploding off of a pier? Too quick and too unsatisfying. Where was the payoff for that whole hand misdirect trick in the supermarket that Harley ought to learn? Or the whole face cutting element kind of made me expect a slower death. Or with it being Harley Quinn, I was expecting more color and firepower. But just a single grenade in a gloomy grey background? It doesn't impress me. And the R-rated factor just seemed like that waste again. Why you gotta get me to bleach my eyes again, film? Why? And though I did love the whole circus sequence, why did the plot have to turn to Harley selling out the kid? It seems a little out of character. Wouldn't it have been cooler if maybe she still called them up to meet there, but she instead tries to shoot back at the guys by teaming up with the kid? The place is literally called the Booby Trap, so why couldn't they both go there with the intention of luring just Black Mask in, only to set it up Home Alone style and try to kill him back for going after this kid? Still, I liked the end result here anyway, so I guess it's a moot point. And then there's the post-credits scene. Well, don't I feel cheated? It's a fun fake out for fans expecting something more, and I was actually kind of curious. At first I thought the line was like, Batman is, and I was going to make a whole rant of it being the most generic sentence joke you could possibly make about Batman being Bruce Wayne, but no, it's Batman so I don't know, maybe it actually leads to something. Probably not, but it was interesting. Had a real Spider-Man Homecoming feel to it, you know? Birds of Prey and the fabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn was one great big mess. It wasn't a dumpster fire of trash, but it was a bunch of cliches stuck together, dipped in functional movie tropes that didn't quite fit the bill, and the story was heavily changed from the comics into something far less powerful or of any real quality. Characters were shafted, plot lines were watered down, and everything felt formulaically similar. That being said, it's great background bait. It can stand up, but doesn't really stand out, and though it has its problems, it's not the worst, and it's kind of a great setup for future movies. I'm sure DC would love to milk out as much of it as it can, but overall, this film is awfully mediocre. The visuals were fantastic, but as the standard of good cinema is getting higher and higher, I don't think we should be celebrating all too much mediocrity, especially from a bigwig as big as DC, who seems to get by on luck more than anything else. But even still, I guess it could always be worse. Let's hope Wonder Woman 1984 knows what it's doing a little bit more. But I guess we'll have to see. For now, my name's been Dazz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit. I'd probably come off as a real Marvel fanboy after this. I swear I'm not, I just want more out of my DC films, you know? They hit gold once, but they clearly don't quite understand how to do it right, even now still. But the visuals, the cinematography, whoever directed that, mwah. Margot Robbie was a producer on this thing, no wonder. This is like, it was good. Just had a lot of flaws as well, you know? 50-50.